Welcome to Omar's Story Nook, where history gets spicy, legends get a remix, and imagination runs wild. Every tale you hear is a whisper of Omar, echoing through desert winds, ink stained scrolls, and pages almost lost to fire. They told you Africa had no books, no scholars, no written record, just drums and dust. But they lied, or worse, forgot. Because before the Renaissance ever bloomed, before Oxford held its first lecture, before the Library of Congress stored a single page, Africa had Timbuktu, a city where camels carried ink, where manuscripts were as treasured as gold, where thought was passed from hand to hand like water. Here, in the heart of Mali, between the 13th and 16th centuries, thousands of scholars wrote about planets and poetry and ethics and God. And when war came for them, the people chose to save pages because they knew what kingdoms forget, that knowledge is memory and memory is power. This is the story of the Timbuktu manuscripts, Africa's literary treasure they tried to erase but could never silence. In the 13th century, under the Great Mali Empire, Timbuktu rose, not just in gold but in mind, led by emperors like Mansa Musa. This was a time when wealth and wisdom walked hand in hand. Caravans of salt and silk passed through its gates, but so did philosophers, mathematicians, poets, and imams. And they didn't come for trade, they came to learn. Because Timbuktu had universities. Sankore, Jingwereba, Sidi Yahya, these weren't just mosques, they were centers of higher learning. Imagine students in robes, hunched over scrolls, teachers reciting texts by lantern light, paper smuggled in from North Africa, ink made from gum Arabic and charcoal, books copied by hand over years, over generations. Subjects, medicine, treatises on cataracts and surgeries performed with reeds. Law, discussions on justice that predate Magna Carta. Astronomy, charts that tracked eclipses and mapped stars across centuries. Mathematics, decimal systems that rivaled Europe's finest minds. The manuscripts were written in Arabic, in Ajami, African languages using Arabic script, and in local dialects, full of proverbs and precision. They weren't just records, they were living memory. And for centuries, Timbuktu stood as proof, QQ, that Africa had books and Africa had brilliance. But brilliance threatens those who build power on ignorance. And so, Timbuktu was invaded again and again. First by Moroccan soldiers in the 1590s, seeking control of trade routes and tax revenue. Later by colonial forces, who dismissed the manuscripts as superstition. Then by religious extremists, who feared the intellectual freedom buried in those pages. Every time, knowledge was under siege. Scrolls were looted, libraries torched, scribes beaten, scholars silenced. But the people of Timbuktu, they didn't run. They remembered. In 2012, when jihadists stormed the city and declared the manuscripts heretical, ordinary Malians became secret librarians. Teenagers smuggled scrolls out in flour sacks. Farmers buried books beneath their floors. Mothers carried manuscripts across deserts wrapped in shawls. Elders risked everything to preserve one truth: words are worth more than gold. Nearly 400,000 manuscripts were saved in secret, protected not by governments, but by people who understood their true inheritance. Because to destroy a book in Timbuktu is to erase a grandfather's voice, a nation's breath, a continent's memory, and memory fights back. So, what was in these manuscripts? What was so powerful it made enemies try to burn every page? Let's look closer. Medical texts, remedies for fevers, diagrams of surgical tools and plant based cures. Astronomy, complex star maps, One even predicted a lunar eclipse in 1497. Mathematics, geometric formulas and equations rooted in Islamic, African, and Berber traditions. Law and ethics, fatwas on trade fairness, marriage rights, and war. Love poetry, lyrical verses that outshine even Rumi, full of longing and grace. Ecology and environment, guidance on water usage, animal ethics, and preservation. One scroll speaks of a just society where leaders are answerable to truth. Another warns against violence in the name of God, centuries before modern debates began. Others details how to treat women, not as property, but with voice, honor, and intellect. These weren't stolen ideas, these weren't European copies. These were original, written by African hands for African minds in African soil. So, when they told you Africa was silent, what they really meant was, we refused to listen, but now the books have returned and they are still speaking. The manuscripts of Timbuktu are not relics, they are revolutions in ink. Today, across Mali, Senegal, Ghana, Nigeria, efforts are underway to digitize, preserve, and reclaim these works. In Bamako, young conservators are learning how to restore aged parchment. In Dakar, universities are teaching curriculum based on the scrolls. In Timbuktu, students are studying not from Western textbooks, but from the wisdom of their own ancestors. And it's not just about pride, it's about power. Because when a child reads the words of a 15th century astronomer who looked like them, who spoke their tongue, who wrote beneath the same stars, something shifts. They realize their people were not discovered, they were never lost, they were erased, and now they are rewriting themselves. And so, the fight to save Timbuktu's manuscripts wasn't just about books, it was about memory. It was about saying, we are not blank pages, we are the authors. They tried to tell the world that Africa had no books, no scholars, no science, but Timbuktu stood, and it still stands, with its walls weathered, its libraries bruised, its scrolls hidden like sacred bones. It remembers. It remembers the nights when teenagers ran to dust to save verses. It remembers the old men who buried entire libraries in crates. It remembers every breath that shaped ink into wisdom, and it whispers still, beneath sand, beneath silence, beneath centuries of forgetting. We were always here. We were always writing. We just learned to write in sand and survive the wind. Until the next whisper of Oma, stay listening. The Timbuktu manuscript, Africa wrote itself, and it still reads.